Well, certainly, COVID zero played a very decisive role in China's very lackluster performance last year. I mean, after all, this was the harshest period of self-imposed isolation by any major country in the world, and it was bound to have had secondary impacts, including the fact that China's connective tissue to the rest of the region was severely impacted. So, people exchanges, cultural influence was down, business ties and the like in both directions, not just Chinese going out into the region, but also the many international visitors who would otherwise have crossed into China. So that has an impact on a country's standing. It also contributed to China's very tepid economic growth in 2022. And this contrasts with a fairly robust economic recovery in the United States.
Well, that's right. Strong economic links and defence ties solidified the US as the leading power in the Asia-Pacific.
Yes, it has. The Biden administration has been very busy, of course, on this front. It has elevated the Quad with India, Australia, and Japan to leadership level. Of course, there's the AUKUS technology sharing agreement with with Australia and the United Kingdom, and a number of other initiatives, including the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum, IPEF. This is, though, contrasted with, I would say, a mixed report card among experts in our region. This is a geographically balanced group of experts who offer qualitative inputs into every country's foreign policy. And they judged that US foreign policy, even though it was number one globally, was only ranked ninth for its policy towards Asia. So that may reflect a bit of a say-do gap in the US's position here. The concern or the perception in this region that what the US commits to is not necessarily what it always follows up on with substance or in substance.
Both countries, however, have seen their overall power ebb, but Australia has managed to hold steady in the index. How so?
Yeah, there are a variety of reasons for that. Australia is the only middle power in the ranking of 26 countries that has emerged essentially unscathed by the pandemic. And this is despite a dip in our own regional influence during the Fortress Australia phase of our COVID policies. So we've recovered from that. The Albanese government gets very strong marks in this region, at least, stronger than the previous government. And there are a number of underlying advantages, of course, that Australia has, one of which, of course, is our very favorable geography. Unlike many Asian counterparts, we have no larger neighbors with whom we have border disputes or unresolved conflict legacies. That makes us very naturally secure. We're also a very wealthy society, one of the few advanced economies that's still growing our working age population thanks to immigration. So the demographic, geographical advantages here are huge, and it's a question of not just what we do or what we have, but what we do with what we have, rather. And the Albanese government seems to be off to a strong start.
Indonesia is quite different in many respects, but it's also done particularly well in this index.
Yes, so the criticism or the refrain that we often hear is that ASEAN as a grouping and Indonesia as a country of 270 million people, the largest country within that grouping, is actually rather weak, diplomatically speaking. But what we've been able to track through our data is the number of diplomatic exchanges at ministerial level and above that every country conducts in our region. And Indonesia actually ranks the second highest behind China on this front. So the foreign minister and President Jokowi has been incredibly busy, not only in terms of hosting ASEAN leaders, but also in terms of hosting the G20 in some very difficult geopolitical circumstances last year. So there is a sort of convening power that Indonesia has, and it suggests that Southeast Asia is still capable of being rather dynamic, despite the fact that it is increasingly squeezed by US-China rivalry.
And it's surprising to know that Japan and India are barely considered major powers anymore.
Yeah, but both have had a rather difficult period through the pandemic. In Japan's case, that's exacerbated, of course, by certain structural factors. This is an aging society. Its workforce is declining, but also it's what we used to describe as a quintessential smart power in the sense that its influence far exceeds its resources, but that influence, that soft influence in economic relationships and cultural influence across the region is slowly starting to erode. Now, of course, Japan is also committing or investing to trying to play a more decisive role in the security architecture of our region, but that isn't happening quickly enough to really compensate for this slow ebbing in its traditional advantages of soft power. So that's what's contributing to Japan's disappointing year. For India, of course, a different set of factors at play. This is an enormous country with huge potential in terms of its economic weight in the region, underpinned by a very large population, soon to be the largest in the world. And yet what we've seen with India is essentially a country that's not necessarily playing a very assertive role economically in our region. It's ranked 9th for economic influence, and it's fallen behind on that measure for every year since we've conducted this index launched in 2018.
Herve Lemahieu, thank you so much for talking to us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.